America is a nation of immigrants. And fortunately for us, all those immigrants bring their booze with them. In 1920, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, making alcohol production and distribution illegal in the United States. And then followed 13 years of chaos. Humans love alcohol. Always have, always will. Proto-humans probably discovered alcohol by eating rotten fruit on the forest floor as far back as 10 million years ago. When fruit rots, the sugars inside naturally ferment, creating ethanol and giving proto-humans a reason to live. And also a reason to figure out how to make magical rotten fruit on their own. If it is fermentable, we have fermented it and drunk it and started building worlds around it. The Chinese made wine out of grapes and hawthorn fruit and rice out of beer. That doesn't make any sense. Beer out of rice. The ancient Egyptians were also booze nerds, making at least 17 different types of beer and 24 types of wine. And the Indians were at least drunk enough by 400 BC that the Ayurvedic texts describe how alcohol increases the pitta in your dosha. Yeah, I'm up on that Ayurvedic shit. Ancient Greeks used wine to propel philosophical discussions, and Romans used it during battle. Let's just say, humans know them some alcohol. Spirits, or hard alcohol, didn't appear until the Persians perfected distillation in the 9th century. But the hard stuff remained more of a medicinal product until the 17th century, when, in order to raise revenue and get rid of a grain surplus, the British passed an act for the encouraging of the distillation of brandy and spirits from grain and corn, which is the most British way to encourage drinking hard alcohol. This flooded the market with cheap spirits, changing people's drinking habits for good and creating a legendary period of civic drunkenness known as the London gin craze. All of which is to say, humans love alcohol. Always have, always will. But the dry martini cocktail, invented somewhere around 1900 with Plymouth gin, good vermouth, and a squeeze of lemon peel, is like boxed cello sweets, or a classic burger with lettuce, tomato, and pickles. You know it is perfect when you experience it. It's not showy, and it's not bold. It doesn't need to be. It's already exactly what it needs to be, and no more. If the old-fashioned cocktail and juleps represent the golden age of drink making, I refer you to letters C and J, respectively, then the martini and the Manhattan come from drinking's Silver Age. And just like in comic books, this is when shit started to get really good. While early bartenders like Jerry Thomas and John Dabney mixed delicious drinks, a lot of them contained sugar or citrus, something to dull down the taste of booze and even cover it up. Remember, we weren't that far removed from the London gin craze, where drinking straight spirits was considered a public health disaster, and most people drank them mixed into extravagant punches. But by the late 1800s, Americans had developed a taste for alcohol itself and didn't want it covered up with sugar. A lot of early spirits were actually sweetened to make them more palatable, but towards the end of the century, more and more unsweetened gins and whiskeys were hitting the market, including Plymouth and other London dry styles. David Wondrich, whose book Imbibe is a must-purchase for anyone watching this, quotes the proprietor of a fashionable drinking place from 1897, who said about the shift away from sweetened drinks,
Let's see, a year ago, I would use a whole quart of gum, which is the general term applied to all the syrups that sweeten the whiskeys and the mixtures. But today, I use barely a whiskey glass of gum, and my business has increased too. You know, people are beginning to realize that their stomachs are not made of cast iron. They want everything dry. The drier, the better.
So, what else can you add to alcohol besides sugar, water, citrus, and bitters? Other alcohol, obviously. Along the same time that these unsweetened gins started appearing, so too did good Italian vermouth. America is a nation of immigrants, and fortunately for us, all those immigrants bring their booze with them. In addition to all the gin, whiskey, brandy, and rum hitting our shores at the time, interesting liqueurs and fortified wines were also finding their ways into bartender hands. Noli Prat, which I have in my fridge always, hit San Francisco in 1853. And while the martini's precise origins are in dispute, it didn't take long for someone to try gin and vermouth together and realize that not only do they go well together, they enhance one another in almost alchemical ways. P is for Prohibition. That period between 1920 and 1933, when America as a whole went through what every serious drinker eventually confronts, a reckoning with booze. The seeds of Prohibition go back to the country's founding. Americans were starting temperance movements, those are groups that promoted abstinence from alcohol, as early as 1789. And while some of these movements were driven by good old Christian moral shaming, a lot of people got into the temperance game because of how destructive alcohol was to them personally. By all accounts, colonial America was a very drunk place. I mean, how many of us have woken up once or twice after a bender and said, "No more, I'm done"? Well, that's essentially what a big portion of the American population was saying in the 19th century as the temperance movement gained steam. By World War I, there was a serious political fight about banning alcohol nationwide. I'll spare you all the legal and governmental details of how it happened, but in 1920, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, making alcohol production and distribution illegal in the United States. And then followed 13 years of chaos. Here are just a few of the repercussions of banning alcohol nationwide. 1. Technically, owning alcohol wasn't illegal, just making and selling it was. So before the ban went into place, rich people, including the president, stockpiled alcohol. 2. Organized crime took hold of liquor production and distribution and ran a very successful black market on booze. This is where we get moonshine and bathtub gin and souped up muscle cars smuggling booze in from Canada, outrunning the cops, and inventing NASCAR. 3. The booze that people were drinking was often horrific and dangerous, cut with various chemicals, just like today's drug dealers cut heroin with fentanyl. An estimated 10,000 people died during Prohibition from drinking bad alcohol, and countless more were blinded and otherwise messed up in both body and brain. 4. Drinking did decline on a nationwide basis, and cirrhosis, what is it? Cirrhosis, yeah. Okay. And cirrhosis death rates for men dropped from 29.5 per 100,000 at the start of Prohibition to 10.7 at the end. But people were still drinking in great numbers, and speakeasies opened up in place of saloons, which meant that a great number of people and business owners were breaking the law and happy to do it. And that lent the age an air of cynicism and lawlessness that many people fretted about just as much as they had fretted over alcohol's effect on people. Basically, it was a train wreck. The agencies tasked with enforcing the rules couldn't keep up, and when the Great Depression hit in 1929, all that lost tax revenue on alcohol was sorely missed. The campaign for repeal gathered steam, culminating in the 21st Amendment, which passed control over all alcohol regulations to the states, which meant booze was back. And that's where we are today. Though it outsells rum and American whiskey by 50 million cases a year now, vodka's arrival to this country was recent and its popularity even more recent. It didn't take off until the 50s and 60s when the Moscow Mule was invented, which says something because like most vodka drinks, it's designed to cover up the vodka. Smirnoff even ran an ad campaign around that time with the tagline, "Smirnoff leaves you breathless," coyly promoting the fact that vodka doesn't make your breath smell like booze, which makes it the spirit of choice for hiding your drinking at work like those lunatics on Mad Men. In a lot of ways, vodka's story in America is a marketing story. From Smirnoff promoting drinking at work, you next get Absolut and its enduring bottle campaign. And then in the 90s, you get Grey Goose and the creation, basically out of thin air, of the super premium vodka craze. The guy who created Grey Goose, Sidney Frank, he's one of my favorites. He's a real American character, a guy who came from nothing and essentially built a billion-dollar business out of nothing but marketing savvy and a desire to be crazy rich. His first success in the liquor business was turning Jägermeister from an old man German drink into a college party igniter. But his real achievement is Grey Goose. After Jägermeister, Frank realized that the real money is in producing and selling the liquor yourself. He decided to make a vodka because you don't have to age it like you do all those other spirits, so it's more cost effective. At the time, Absolut was the most expensive vodka on the market at $17 a bottle. Frank decided he was gonna sell his at $30, and this was before he had a product. He chose the name because it sounded expensive, and he decided to make it in France because he said, all the best stuff comes from France. Everything he did made Grey Goose seem expensive. The frosted glass bottle, the wooden box with straw they'd send to bars with samples, and then of course the price. And while it is true that Grey Goose was awarded the best tasting vodka in 1998 by the Beverage Tasting Institute, it is also true that what does that even mean? Most vodkas on the market actually buy neutral grain spirit from an industrial producer, maybe distill it one more time, cut it with water, and add flavoring. The whole nature of vodka is one of hyper subtlety, because once you get to 97% pure alcohol and water, you aren't dealing with a ton of flavor.